Okay, and we're back. So we talked about this keyboard event stuff in Tkinter, right? That's what we talked about last. We talked about this force focus or focus force method to do that for Tkinter. I'm talking Tkinter because, again, I want you guys to know the alternative way to do stuff with Python. And again, I think that Tkinter is a great built-in UI, very simple, believe it or not, to do different UIs, especially dialog boxes and those kinds of things that you can launch within your applications if you're going to make applications with Python as opposed to just using Python for making games. Okay, so let's talk about binding. So we showed it how I did that. You have this bind method, and the bind takes in these multiple events. Now you can do as an example, return would be your keyboard event. That's what you're looking for. But you can bind all kinds of other events that Tkinter will be looking for, right? You're listening for a keyboard import, or you're listening for a mouse press, or whatever. These are all the kinds of events that you can listen for in your binding. And we kind of showed you that. If I go back to, and I had closed it, of course. If you go back to keyboard.py, and if you look down here, you've got your bind method, and it's looking for the type of event, and then it's going to the event handler. This is what this event handler is. Similarly, you can program the same kind of thing with Pygame, and I'll show you that. But this methodology right here is very common. You might see this if you're programming in Android, or if you're programming in iOS, or if you're programming in any other language, JavaScript. It has the same kind of general form. You've got the type of event you're listening for, and then you've got some kind of event handler method that you're going to go to. You're going to jump to that method as soon as the type of event you're listening for is activated or triggered. Okay? And that's really the lesson here for this one. Okay. Again, we've retrieved information from the event because we can use the report event routine that is outlined in this code. And again, if you go back to that, of course, I closed it again. I kind of outlined it again. Here it is. So here's a report event. This is the method. And all I'm doing is I'm saying, well, you know what? Depending on the type of event, let's kind of output it to the screen, to the console. This is what this thing does. Okay, so there's another thing called command binding. We did one thing called, there's button binding, and there's another way of doing it called event binding, where you have this event handler functionality. Okay, so let's take a look at that. There's different kinds of buttons that we can, or different events we can listen for. For example, there's a button press event and a button release event. And depending on the type of event that you're listening for, you can actually do different things with them. So if you go to this command.py program, here it is. Here's the command.py. So again, I'm getting you to look at this, even though I know some of you hate Tkinter, but I'm getting you to look at this not just for Tkinter, but for the class structure. So please follow along for the class structure, because we're going to do classes in Pygame, and they're going to knock you out if you don't do things properly with them. All right, so let's take a look. So here again, we've got a class called MyApp. That's what this is. And it's inside, here's the constructor for the class, the constructor method, right? And again, I've got a couple of buttons. And instead of having the other binding event, when I'm using the bind methodology, right? So I'm using a bind method for my events. I'm using this, that was the binding method. This is the command binding method, right? And all I'm doing is, inside my button itself, I'm actually configuring a command that says self.button1click. It's exactly the same way. It just, or it actually performs very similarly, but has different effects. And we'll see that in a bit. So again, you go to this different function. So it says if the command, if you get a command, you can do many different things with this command. All right. In other words, you're not just listening for one type of event. You're not listening for a click or a keyboard. You're listening for everything to do with that button. Okay? And what you're doing is you're interpreting the type of event that comes in and doing something with it. So you're not limited to just a specific event like a keyboard press or a mouse press. It'll accept everything. Okay? So that's the difference between command binding and the other type of event handling. So let's take a look. Again, same thing. So if I click on it, it works, right? And here it is again, right? I can cancel it. It accepts all kinds of input, right? It's listening for all types of events. That's a different method. I don't recommend this as a strict method because the thing is it's not very specific. It listens for everything, right, and responds to any kind of event for that button. And again, you could down here in the method itself test for the type of event that you're getting. Okay. So it's a different kind of event. And here's again the general form. Again, self1.button, the button itself, the container, and the command. Right? So command binding does not, like it says, automatically pass an event object to an argument. It doesn't do it. Right? It listens for everything. Right? Let's talk about this event and command, kind of listening to both things. So I'm going to go to the next one, event and command. So here's another class. Again, please follow along if you're not familiar with classes in Python, because this is what this structure is all for, right? So if you look at the this particular one, you have your command right here, right? So this is for everything, and you also have an event. Here's the event binding. Here's your command binding, and there's different things you're doing with them, right? Actually, you're listening for both things. So if you go to button1.click, it changes the color, and at the same time, right, anything that clicks changes the color, but it's also listening for a return keyboard press, right? And if in that case, it goes to this other function called button1click A, which is down here, right? So you can actually do both events, both type of event bindings for each button click, and which is very powerful. That means that allows you more customization when it comes to event handling, right? You can do more than one thing at once. You can do simultaneous events, right? Because that's what's happening here. Okay. Okay, let's move on. How do you share information between event handler functions? Right? There's different ways of doing it. Again, you're going to have some variables that are going to be outside of these functions, and you're going to pass them into the functions themselves, right? But remember, because they're functions inside of classes, they're called methods. So you still have to have that self keyword when you're doing that kind of passing of information. So here's the one way. Solution one, use global variables. Bad. Please don't use global variables. If you use global variables in assignment number 1 or assignment number 2, you're going to lose marks, right? This is a bad thing. Don't do this, right? And this is the way you do it. You say global, right, for your variable. And I'm giving you this solution not because I want you to use it, because I want you to identify it when you see it one day if you ever program in Python. And by the way, PyCon 2013 is coming up. For those of you who are interested in going to a conference, Python is quickly becoming one of the lead languages when it comes to rapid application development because it's so simple, right? And if you're interested in going in Toronto, I think there might be even a student rate of $25, right, for you guys to do that kind of thing. And they have full days of training where they teach you different things to do in Python and everything else. I fully recommend it. PyCon, if you want to look it up. Okay. So this, yeah?
What about global constants?
Global constants are different, right? Global constants are useful because what we're doing is you're using them, and if you change them at the top, it changes some key variables throughout the code. Like, for example, you know, your life for the player, that kind of stuff. Constants are okay. The concept of constants is fine. It's how you use the constants throughout your code that's important, right? So you don't break the
change necessarily
right.
in the code. Then you can state as a constant.
If it's used as constant, if you use it properly as a constant, everything is good. If you don't, and if you use them as variables, it's bad. It's not good.
Like I set the screen, like the pyname.display.set mode 640 by 480. I
Yeah.
set that as constant because it changes. Like screens never set to anything else.
Well, you can. Yeah, it's fine, but you can. Again, what if you wanted to test it on a different type of screen, right? 640 by 480. Maybe you want to do 320 by 480 if you're doing the size of a video game of a mobile device, right? So again, that might be something that you may want to put in as a constant and then change it later on if you want to test it for a different device. Okay, so that's one way. Solution one, global variables, right? So again, global and different variables, the way we normally do variables. Again, potentially dangerous because, and I think this line here is really cool, which is it's frowned upon as sloppy programming, all right? So use global variables, sloppy, all right? You clean up your mess, is what I would say, right? Solution 2 is using instance variables, right? And this is a much cleaner method, right? And again, what you're going to use is the variables that have that self keyword at the beginning, right? To hold the information and then share them between the handlers. That's the way to do it. And actually, instance variables in other languages are called class variables, right? They're going to be defined. They're going to live and die within the class itself. They're not accessible outside of the class necessarily. And there's something that you're going to be using to pass information between the different methods. Okay, so let's look at sharing variables.py. So I'm going to go into sharing variables. And again, let's maximize so you guys can see it all. So here it is. My last button invoked would be your instance variable right here. Last button invoked, right? And all I'm doing is I'm saying once I'm going into my class, here's my constructor again. Because it's a class variable, it's accessible to my my methods. So example, here I'm saying my last button invoked is none. I mean, the none keyword is basically saying it's like no, right? So there is no last button invoked, right? But as soon as I click on a button, it's going to change my last button invoked variable, my instance variable, to whatever button was clicked, red, yellow, and so on, right? And then what I can do is I can output what my last button invoked was. So, and I actually do that. Print red button clicked. Previous button invoked was whatever my last button invoked was. So that's just a way that's the way instance variables work, or class variables, so to speak, inside your classes in Python. Let's run that and see how it works. So here we are. And if you look at the, try that again. If you look at the console for a second, if I click on yellow, it says, hey, the yellow button was clicked. The previous button invoked was none, because there was no previous button clicked, right? If I click red, right, red button clicked, the previous button invoked was yellow. So it remembers my last button click, right? And again, I'm doing that. Doesn't matter which one I'm doing, right? I'm doing it through this instance variable in my class. So again, even though you may say, hey, Tkinter really sucks, Tom, I don't really care. That's fine. But this isn't about Tkinter. This is about Python structure. So please follow along for that. All right. Let's talk about GUI layout techniques, okay, for Tkinter. All right. Now again, you guys aren't really happy with this, but the pack technique was the first method that we kind of used. We use this frame and pack mentality, right? And you can look at GUI layout.py on your own because you have the code, right? And again, you can look at different frames. You can actually, this is kind of cool. Nesting your frames is cool. Let's look at this one. So for Tkinter, this actually works very similarly in Pygame, right? If I look at nesting. So here what I'm doing is I have one container called, this frame is called my container 1. And what I'm actually doing is I'm creating another container called the buttons frame, right? So here's another container, right? And here's my top frame. And what I'm doing here is similar to what I talked about before. I'm using my top level container and several secondary subcontainers to hold different items. The same kind of concept that you can use with your assignment number 3. When you're programming assignment number 3, you can have different surfaces, if you will, that you can fill in and do different things with as a parent surface. Okay, so let's take a look at that. So if I run this one, so here's my different containers, right, in Tkinter. I have my left, my middle one, there's my middle container, my bottom, and here's a couple of containers here that have the OK and cancel buttons. Okay, these are all different containers, and if you notice when I create the buttons, right, and I'm going to go down here, my buttons are actually, the parent container for the buttons is the button frame, as an example. And depending on what different containers have, they actually use the frame as their top level, the link to that top level container or their parent container. Okay, so you can do, that's very, very key when you do things like with Python or strictly with Python and Tkinter or with Pygame or another framework. You're going to have top level containers that you're going to be dealing with. Okay. Window manager geometry, I think this is my last slide. Let's take a look at this before I go into the new stuff I've added and I've uploaded this morning. All right. So here's geometry. Okay. And what this is doing is, here's my class again, right? And what I'm doing here is I'm actually passing in the geometry of 600 by 400, which tells your window the size of my top level window. I'm giving Tkinter some configuring it, or so to speak, for what type of geometry I'm using. And this is going to go through a loop where I'm going to create several different windows and close them off as I click my buttons. Okay, let's take a look at how this works. So I play. So here's my first one, right? My first Tkinter window. Here's case 1, right? So it's a certain size, and I close it. Here's another one. So just the buttons, right? And I close that. Here's another one, 600 by 400, and I close that. And here's another one that has the different geometries that is showing for different windows. So there's like 4 different windows, and this is doing it through this loop, these nested for loops that's running through, right, from 0 to 1. So there's 4 different cases, okay? And all it's doing is changing the window according to the type of case. And it's all done through the constructor, right? If you look at the constructor, and if you do the math, it changes the size of the windows depending on the type of case. Okay, but the idea here is that your geometry, right, if I'm using the geometry at all, my geometry is going to be 600 by 400. Okay? But to me, the best type of thing for us, and this is where I recommend for assignment number 2, and let's review assignment number 2. If I was going to make a solution for assignment number 2 with Tkinter, how would I do it? How would I be accurate? Because some of your questions that I got through email were, you know what, Tkinter really sucks. I want to use Pygame because I can't really align things like I want. I can't be absolute with my alignment. And the answer is yes, you can. And I'll show you how to do that right now. So I've uploaded this file called, and if you want to follow along with me, if you download this new file called placegeometry.py, I've created this new file for you. And placegeometry.py does a couple of things. It uses the class, right? I'm also using another library, which again I recommend for you to use, whether you're using Pygame or not, right? It's the PIL library, and you can actually download that, install that on your machine. And PIL allows you to use multiple or different image formats, okay? Because sometimes Pygame or Tkinter or other frameworks won't allow you to load in a PNG file or a bitmap file or whatever. So in this particular case, I'm loading the bitmap file that we're going to make with our Paint program. We're going to go back to this in a second. And what I'm doing here is I'm using PIL as a library so that I can import bitmaps. Okay, again, you have this code. I put it up on Blackboard for you. But the key is I'm doing 2 things. I'm creating a canvas object, right, which is a container. This is my parent container instead of a frame. I'm using a canvas for my solution. And this is how you would build your slot machine, okay? So I've got my top level window, and I'm drawing now for those people who are watching the video. I've got my top level window, and inside my top level window, I've got a canvas object, right, that I'm filling in with the background that I want. And in the case of a slot machine, it's my slot machine image. This is where it's going to go, right here. My slot machine image in my canvas, right? But it's going to be my parent container for everything else. That means every other button is going to use this canvas, which I call BG panel, background panel, right? I'm using this background panel as the canvas for all the other buttons. They're going to be layered on top of this. So my background panel is going to be behind my buttons because anything that's using it, any other children or child objects that are layered on top of this object are going to be shown in front of it. Okay? So how do they come up with these heights and everything else? If you notice, I'm using place geometry for my label, and I'm saying, when I use place, the general form is the place method, x and y coordinates for where my object is going to start, and my height and width. It's perfect. It gives me the exact placement for wherever any object that I want. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So I'm going to go back into Fireworks for a second. So here's Fireworks. Okay? And I'm going to load up my paint bitmap. Here's my paint bitmap that I have, right? I want to place a button, okay? And I want to place it in the exact location I want. And I want Tkinter to show me that button exactly where I want it. Okay, let's do it. So I'm going to load up my buttons. So I'm going to go into my code. And here's my buttons. I've just got them into the right place here. So I'm going to load up my reset button. Here's my reset button. Actually, let's just load all of them. This one and Fireworks, I can kind of load them all up at the same time. Okay, so here's all my assets. And by the way, I like using Fireworks as my graphic program of choice. It's lighter weight than Photoshop and so on, and allows me to do a lot of manipulation. It works for the web really well as well. Okay. But onto that, I have all my buttons. I have my reset button, my power button, my click me button. I've got all these buttons I want to put on this background that I have, right? Now, it's not going to look like this. All I'm doing here is I'm prototyping. Okay, I want to make my buttons look a certain way. How do I do this? Okay, so now I'm going to take my reset button. Here it is, which is 80 by 80, right? And I'm going to go back to my painting and drop it in. Well, I want my reset button probably to be on this side over here, right? Somewhere. Well, if you look at down here in the left-hand corner of Fireworks, it tells you my coordinates right here. I know my drawing, my image for my button is 80 by 80. I know that. And I know my coordinates are going to be 549 by 11 in a 640 by 480 framework. So this way, if I wanted it to be exactly like this, layered in my window, going back to my program, right? This is where I got these coordinates. If I was going to go for my reset button, now in this particular case, it's going to be slightly different, 548 by 5. If I want to match that with Fireworks to make it look exactly what I said, I just changed these. So I was pretty close. 548. Here's 548, and here's 5. I just changed the coordinates, and it moves the button. This is exactly the position of the button that I have on my frame, on my window. So I'm prototyping the way my window is going to look for my game before it's even made. I'm doing it here in Fireworks. I'm manipulating a drag and drop surface, right? Let's do the same thing for my power button now. My power button here, I'm going to build it. So here's I get this, this lame kind of power button that I got from the web, right? And here's where it is, right? And I'm probably going to put it around the same place, but just on the left-hand side. And let's see what I did on in my code. I was pretty close to that as well. My power button, just to match it up, is X coordinates 12 and Y coordinates are 5. So let's go back, 12 and 5. So I was 10 and 5, very close, 12 and 5. There it is. And let's go back. Okay, so now my last one is, I've got my label. Now my label, there is no label object. I'm going to produce a label in Tkinter, right? But my label object, if I want to look at it, here it is, up here, is 35 by 200. That's the size of my label. So let's do that. Let's just emulate that here in Fireworks. So I'm going to draw a rectangle, right? So I'm going to go to like a rectangle object. Here it is. All right, so here's my rectangle object. And that's not 35 by 200, it's way bigger. So let's just change the width and the height here. So here's 35 by 200, but I want it in a particular location. I can drag it so it's in the middle of the screen. Fireworks allows me to do that. It allows me to preview where the middle of the screen is. There it is. That's the middle of the screen. And it's showing me it should be at 220 and 28. Let's see what I put it where I put it. I put it at 221 and 27, very close, as an example. So this is where my label is going to be. This is where it's going to appear. And now I want to put my last button, which is going to be my Click Me button, which again, I kind of took this from the internet, this little button, and I modified it because I wanted to put Click Me on it. Because I liked the outside of it, but I didn't like what was inside of it. It was pretty ugly. So I kind of made my own button here in Fireworks. So I grab this, I drop it into my background, and I put it somewhere down here in the middle. So they're probably right in the middle and at the bottom. Okay, and again, it's 80 by 80, and it shows here my coordinates are 280 by 388. Let's see where I put it in my actual code, right? 281 by 385. It's very close, okay? So now I know where everything is going to be, and I use the place geometry manager to allow me to place my objects on my window exactly where I want them to be. That's the power of Tkinter that you can't do with Pygame as easily. Now watch. So this is what my window is going to look like. I'm going to load up my bitmap just like this, right? And if I go back to my code and I launch it, I get exactly what I said, right? So here's my my label where I have unclicked. I click on click me, clicked, right? And if I want to reset, I've also included, by the way, for your viewing pleasure, Tkinter message boxes for those of you who are going to use Tkinter for your final solution, right? So I reset. I have a little dialog box that comes up saying, are you sure you want to reset? I say yes. And it resets to unclicked. Okay? All this is in the code that I've uploaded to you. Okay? And if I click on this button, it quits. Okay? So but the buttons are exactly where I want them to be, not through pack and frame geometry managers that kind of put them wherever Tkinter wants them to be put. Okay? Questions? You can do the same thing in Pygame, but the challenge is making the button functionality work like this. The button functionality in Pygame is much more complex. You've got to create your own button class. That's right. So that whereas, again, with Tkinter, I can come up with buttons. I can come up with dialog boxes. It's got a lot of built-in functionality that Pygame doesn't have. So again, going back to a rapid application development methodology, right, we want to create a quick and dirty dialog box or application. Tkinter is faster. I can create a Tkinter app very, very quickly, unless I have a big Pygame library of different tools, classes that I've already made I can reuse. Right?
Why would Pygame by now come with, buttons, text boxes?
Because they want you to make it your own. They want you to create your own classes. You can download some of the ones that are out there anyway, like some of you have, right? But it's about, Pygame is really a game framework. Tkinter and PyQt and other frameworks are really more in terms of making apps and UIs for apps. Okay, but you can do a UI with Pygame. It's just a lot harder.
But even in a game, you would often have a user interface.
You would, but that's why I'm saying you'd probably you're going to make more of a custom user interface in the game with more complexity and more control. Like whereas in you're limited, the control for making buttons in Tkinter is limited. You have certain buttons are going to look a certain way. You can do a couple things, but you'd have to subclass the buttons anyway if you're going to make your own custom buttons. So if you're going to go that far, you might as well use a framework like Pygame if you're going to be making a game and doing animations. Right? Okay, so that's the Place Geometry Manager. I've placed this file as well as a bunch of my assets, like the reset button, the painting, and all that stuff. I put them all up online for you so you can take a look at how all that works if you need to use Tkinter as your framework.
Where is it?
It's under, if you go on Blackboard, under Code Archive, and on the bottom there should be something called placegeometry.zip. It should have a little zip framework there. Zip archive. Okay, so that's all I'm going to talk about for Tkinter. I don't think there's going to be much more discussion on Tkinter for the rest of the semester, right? I wanted to bring it to you because that's how I did my solution for assignment number 2, but it doesn't mean that you have to do that. And I'm sure, like I see so far, most of you are using Pygame. All right, so before we continue, I'm just going to pause this one. I'm going to pause this this recording, so that way we can go on to the next section, which